Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Boss podcast. Today, I'm joined with Shulamit Ber Levtov. Did I say it right? Yay! And Shulamit is known as the entrepreneur's therapist. She is a cultural change catalyst focusing on mental health and entrepreneurship. She supports individual women business owners through the emotional challenges of running business and speaks, teaches, and consults with incubators, accelerators, and business programs nationally and internationally. Shula's unique approach combines her 30 plus years of entrepreneurship and 24 plus years as a mental health professional. She's a master's level somatic trauma therapist with certifications in the trauma of money and financial social work and is a trauma survivor herself. Shula, thank you so much for joining me today. It's such a privilege to have you.
I'm so delighted to be here. I've been looking forward to this day.
Yes, we knew very, very quickly when we met in a networking call not that long ago. You were like, I got to be on your podcast. And I'm like, I got to have you on my podcast. And we made it happen. I'm so glad.
We are.
Here we are. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do, and then we'll jump into this conversation.
Sure. So the story of how I became the entrepreneur's therapist.
Yeah.
I was running a group practice. Things were going really well. It was August 2020, but unrelated to COVID, I was a wreck because, like many business owners, I was doing all the things. And I was also still continuing to provide client service. I was still seeing clients. And the stress built up to such a point that I publicly, a teammate wasn't following through on what they had said they were going to do. And instead of addressing it with them individually in private, I did it publicly in front of the rest of the team, which is bad leadership and also out of alignment. Every time I tell this story, I still feel the regret around that. At home, like, we don't have the kind of relationship where we fight over the garbage, but I was screaming at him about my beloved, about taking out the garbage. Yeah. And I was telling my therapist about this, like, legit, is this a sweary show?
You can absolutely swear. Do it.
Okay. I'm pissed off. What these people did was so wrong. And he's like, yes, what they did was wrong. But at the same time, how you responded is also not right.
Yeah.
And you need to take a break. And I went, well, I could take maybe a. And he's like, no. He had wanted me to take stress leave. But when I stopped to think about it, I realized what I needed to do was exit the business. And I did. It was hard to do. I felt like I was letting down my associates and the community because this was a group practice in a rural community where there wasn't at the time access to many therapists. So I'm sitting at home alone. It's September 2020. I've exited the business and I'm like, I've taken a stress leave and what the heck am I going to do now?
Yeah.
And I thought about my own experience and I thought about, as the lone entrepreneur, a lone therapist hanging out in entrepreneurial spaces, how other business owners had whispered to me in private about the mental health challenges of running a business. And it was like my mental health mind and my business mind had a baby. I realized that there's a gap. We don't have mental health professionals who understand the impact of business on mental health and what to do about it.
It's so true.
Yes.
It's so true. There are so many facets about being entrepreneurs that I feel like are just not understood by, like, I don't want to say common folk as a derogatory term, but lay people who aren't entrepreneurs, right?
Employees.
Employees. And, it's a challenge to find people who speak the language, like, that you just on a relationship level. So having business besties is so key.
Yes. Key.
Which just leads me to the conclusion that if having business besties who understand and at least vibe with you, even if they don't speak 100% the same niche language, that just means having a therapist or having mental health support that understands the language
100%.
And gets what you're doing is just that much more important. And I think it's something that is not talked about enough.
It isn't. In a recent survey HubSpot did, they found that 85%, I think it was, or 86% of the respondents to their survey said that there's still stigma around mental health and entrepreneurship, much more so than in the general population. And so the stigma alone is enough to prevent people from talking about it, entrepreneurs from talking about the mental health impact or their mental health struggles. And the fear we have is that when we reveal our vulnerability, it will undermine people's confidence in us and our business. And when those are the stakes, are you going to talk to anybody?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And this is like, I think community, for one, is a very powerful mental health strategy. So being able to talk about your struggles, your emotional struggles as a business owner with other business owners, either one-to-one as a peer, like your bestie, or in a community, is still by far the easiest and most significant mental health support we can put in place.
Mm-hmm.
But the value of a therapist is that you can say anything to them and their lips are sealed. So you can say all the unsayable things about that client who drives you nuts,
Right.
about that contractor who did XYZ, and you can call them all the names you need to call them in order to get it out of you so that it doesn't impact your behavior outside the session. But the therapist, it has no impact in your world because it's in the vault.
Right.
So you can take all the risks to be real with the therapist, and there's no consequences except possibly feeling better and personal growth, right? But no harm.
Oh no, the worst. Personal growth. How dare we?
Yeah.
Well, I think, and I know as an entrepreneur, right? Like I've been in the digital space for 15 years. I grew up, if you will, through digital entrepreneurship with like the coming of age of like influencers and, women who were dabbling in blogging as like an outlet started making money, and then they started making legitimate money, and then they started growing epic businesses. And it was accidental entrepreneurship, right? Like that's how I got into it. Accidentally started doing VA work, turned that into social media management, et cetera, et cetera. In that process, I also grew up through the era of social media where it was Instagram perfection, Pinterest perfection, right? Your house had to be a certain thing. Your vibe had to be a certain thing, because we were like, the idea was like you were giving people something to aspire to. And if you are being aspirational or inspirational, you should not have any elements of your life that are publicly failing.
Completely, yeah. Well, I have to say, this is really going to date me, but when I grew up, it was the Good Housekeeping seal of approval.
Right.
Or in Canada, we had Good Housekeeping, but we also had Chatelaine magazine.
Mm-hmm.
Standards have always been set for women.
Yes.
And they have been unwinnable standards. If you meet one, you lose on the other. If you meet the other, you lose on the you know what
100%.
I'm sure the women listening know.
Yeah.
That women just cannot win for losing. So we might as well set our own standards. But what I've noticed in like my 40-ish years of adulthood is that the intensity and the degree and the rapidity of exposure to these harmful standards is like, I don't know what it would be like to grow up that way.
Right.
To come into your adulthood that way. I would expect that it's like the weight of that is going to be really a lot to bear.
Yeah. I was fortunate in some of my upbringing in that I was homeschooled. So my mom did a really good job of filtering out a lot of like societal expectations until I was like 16, 17 and started like exposing myself to the real world. Unfortunately, I was also extremely naive and was easily kind of manipulated into some unhealthy relationships because of that. Like, so there's good and bad to both of that. But like, I grew up in an environment where I was told constantly that I was a leader, right? Like that I was put on this earth to do epic things. I was held to a very high standard of excellence and integrity and like a very strong moral compass. And I'm very grateful for that in a lot of ways. In other ways, I'm like, what the hell did you do to me?
Right? Because you came into a world where other people aren't operating that way.
Yes, I did. And then I also, kind of grew up, if you will, in my late 20s inside of a narcissistic abusive relationship away from my family, right? Like I moved to Texas, I married an American, I did the whole like cowboy love story. Turns out it wasn't that much of a love story. It was more of like a manipulation story, but it's what started my business. So I have zero regrets about what I learned, who I became, the way I, matured and became this better version of myself through all of that. But part of that was this, like, I grew up with this almost impossible ideal around excellence that was perfection, a demand for perfection masquerading as a call for excellence. And I've really internalized that. So now I'm, in my early 40s, learning to undo this idea of like always being perfect, always being productive, always being on, and learning to rest and learning to accept that sometimes good is enough. And
Mm-hmm.
good is more than enough on days where I have like very little in me to give, because I also battle a chronic health issue. But we have to have these conversations in order to change the standard, to change the expectation, and to take pressure off of the people who like need to hear this.
Yes, there's a really good principle from the Trauma of Money program. I'm a certified trauma of money facilitator, and I'm faculty in the program now. It's called decrease shame, increase discernment.
Mm.
They put it that way, but I like to put it the other way around, because I find, and they definitely show this in the program, that when we have discernment around what messages are coming to us, what the narrative is, and where those narratives come from, when we have discernment around that, and we place them where they belong, which is external to us, and we reimagine our own way of being, our own values, and our own standards for our own self, independent of toxic, white, cis, het, patriarchal supremacy, right?
Yeah.
And develop our own values and steer by those values. Then when we are hit by the standards, this is the discernment, we go, oh, that shame belongs there.
Yeah.
It's not my shame. It's their shame. It's a shaming system. I don't endorse it. I'm going to steer by my own North Star. So by having the discernment around what the messages are and where they're coming from, and reimagining a world free of capitalism and in integrity with my own values and steering by those, it makes it easier to navigate. I mean, we're still living in that world, so there's friction between the world and our values, but understanding that there's a difference between me and that, then it takes it out of me,
Yeah.
So discernment and decreasing shame go together.
Yeah, it's so interesting because a lot of our work is parallel. Like, your work is parallel to the journey that I was on. The work that I had to do internally to get out of that narcissistic abusive relationship in Texas was centered around, what did I want? What was I willing to do to achieve it? And why did it matter to me? Which led me to really this micro understanding of my core values. Mm-hmm. And that in turn influenced the work that I began to do. And it's where I pivoted into coaching and more consulting, and really helping entrepreneurs understand what their personal values are and how that impacts the work they do and how they attract their ideal client. There's a lot of correlation between that. And in understanding what my values meant to me and really doing work on imagining the impact of them in my future life and on a current daily basis, I was able to really decide things, because I knew what I wanted my life to look like and how I wanted it to feel. And that gave me the information I needed, right? We can't really make informed choices if we don't have data.
Well, exactly.
We have to have data. We have to have understanding. Yeah. And that really put me in a position of making powerful choices for myself, because I wasn't willing to compromise. And I find myself saying often in the work that I do, when I am coaching around values, is once you know, you can't unknow, and now you are obligated to do differently. Because once you've seen that line in the sand for yourself, you can't go back to hiding unless you're making really intentional choices. Mm-hmm. There's just not an option. You are now obligated to yourself to go do better. And I think that's why a lot of this conversation is so key, is because people don't know to change and, do better if they're not aware that there's a problem in the first place.
Sure. And I think being clear on your values really does give you that point of reference. What happens, I'm not sure if you are aware of the statistic. I should back up 2 steps. Before I became the entrepreneur's therapist, I was a trauma therapist, mm-hmm. and I worked in community mental health, supporting women survivors of gender-based violence, what we used to call domestic violence, women fleeing abusive relationships. And on average, it takes about 7 years for a woman to leave. And people will say, why don't they leave? First of all, I want to challenge that. Why don't we ask, why don't the men stop the behavior, the harmful behaviors? Yeah. But we don't ask that question. Yeah. But, for the women here who are stuck in situations that are painful and difficult or harmful and want to get out, just the knowledge that it takes 7 years to do it in many cases, there's nothing wrong with you. You're on the path. And it's a process, a long process. And often what happens is your values come into conflict. Once you become sure in your values, they come into conflict with your current situation. But in order for change to happen, change of any sort to happen, we have to really feel, in many cases, we have to live with the conflict for enough time to be able to, for it to move us into action.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with you if you can't take action immediately upon seeing what you're seeing.
Yeah.
You have to find a way, and it takes time. Like, you might need to have a safety plan. You might need to have, a place to go. You might need to have a secret stash of money. You might have to, it takes a while to build all that stuff up in order to be able to get out. But living with the conflict is actually a step on the path out.
Right.
Or a step on the path out of a violent relationship, or a step on the path to change in whatever other way you want to change in your life.
Yeah. I find oftentimes we get so comfortable, right? Like we become inoculated to behaviors, we become inoculated to like, oh, wait, maybe I don't like that. But because it happens incrementally, we don't really realize it until one day we have 100%. This like grand awakening. 100%. That was my experience. Like I had this grand awakening, the straw that broke the camel's back. And there was no, right? Like from that point forward, there was only out.
Sure.
But it takes something to kind of create that catalyst, both in business, in moving people to through the sales journey. There's a catalyst where people recognize that they're uncomfortable with the way things are, and they need an outside force or factor or decision to really move them to the next level.
Because we're stronger with support.
Yes, 100%. 100%. I'm very grateful that I had some incredible friends who were like, cool, you're ready to go? Finally, what do we have to do to make this happen? My situation was complicated by the fact that it was COVID. So that implemented and then I was also Canadian living in America. There was a whole bunch of extra challenges with that. But we're not here to talk about that today. We're here to talk about the work you do with entrepreneurs. What do you find most often is the catalyst that is pushing entrepreneurs to be like, okay, maybe I do need help?
Well, I'll answer that question in a second, but
sure.
What we were talking about before is not unrelated actually to business.
Oh, no, definitely.
Because there are two so the research on entrepreneurship and mental health shows that entrepreneurs come from a pool of people in the general population who are predisposed to mental illness, to mental health challenges. So, but we're also humans in our business. So there's the likelihood that we have a predisposition, and we have our personal experience that comes with us to the business.
Yeah.
So our personal experience, for example, our mutual, because I also fled a violent relationship, an abusive relationship. Like that has an impact on who we are. Whatever you've been through in the past has an 100%. Impact. And many women, especially, who come to business. I hear your dog in the background. Hi, doggy. Many women who start in business do it for a reason, to accommodate something that doesn't fit for them. I'm also chronically ill. You have a chronic illness. Women with mental health challenges, women with children whose 9 to 5 just doesn't, women who experience multiple systems of oppression, like women of color, women with disabilities, mobility challenges, all those kinds of things. And living in that body with those oppressions coming to bear on you has an impact on your mental health.
100%.
And you start your business in order to make yourself a safer space and a more reliable way of earning money that's suited for your needs. So,
and then we call it freedom.
Well, it is a kind of freedom. It is,
yes.
Really. And we bring all this to the business, and then the business has its own impact on us. Mm-hmm. So the researcher, the grandfather of research into mental health and entrepreneurship, he calls it what we bring to the party and what the party brings to us.
Yep.
And so in response to your question, what brings somebody into the chair in my office or into the meeting room is exactly what you say. They are strong, powerful, competent, capable women who have hit a wall.
Yeah.
Like you said, the straw that broke the camel's back. And they're looking at the straw. They're holding up the straw and going, it's a straw. What is the matter with me? And I say, girl, woman, friend, person, take a look at the pile of straws, the 2 tons of straws on your back. Yeah. That's why. It's not one straw. It's all the straws.
Yeah.
And because stress accumulates and potentiates, and then it has an impact, and it comes to the point where you hit the wall and you're like, my software crashed yesterday and now I can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
And it's that wall, that moment, that pivotal moment of like, I can't carry on the way I have been. What am I going to change?
Yeah. And those moments are really, I've had a few of those moments in my life.
You and me both.
I don't know a human on this planet that hasn't, especially entrepreneurs who haven't had a few of those moments. And I think the way we tackle them and handle them as we grow and mature speaks a lot to how we tackle and handle the ones before. But there's an opportunity, right? And I have learned to look at those catalyst moments in life as an opportunity, right? For me, if I can find the potential to learn from this moment, whether good or bad, right? Sometimes they're great moments, but they're also overwhelming and you're like, holy shit, what do I do? Or they're really impactful and can be traumatizing and harmful. I have learned to look for, okay, well, if I can learn something from this and then turn that into value
100%.
to impart to someone else, a little less traumatizing.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we don't need help to navigate the rest of it.
Sure. I would say there's a caveat about this because many people will jump toward the lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And it can actually kind of amplify the pain they're in the moment. When it's a fresh moment, and in business, we have failures, mistakes, things that don't work out like on the daily. And it's hard, right? Attending to the emotional side, caring for the grief, the loss, the pain, the distress must come first. And then we can mine the disaster for the gold that is there, the wisdom, the lesson, the learning. And so I don't disagree with you. And I think there's a step that needs to come first, which is that the attention to our hearts, really, our hearts and minds and how they're affected by what has happened. Truly like doing the grieving, taking the care. And it's out of that actually that's the alchemical process that allows us to transmute the pain, the difficulty, the failure into a learning.
Yeah. I can say from my own personal experience that is very key, because the first time I had like okay, well, I'm going to find some gold in this. I moved too quickly to the gold, right? Like I went digging for the gold too quickly and did not do the grieving.
We lay this on other people. We don't give them the space and time to do the grieving or the feeling of anything. But anyway, back to you.
Yeah, no, you are correct, because I've seen, right, like people they've gone through a loss of something and they're like, 2 weeks later, people are like, okay, back to real life. Like, why are you still crying about this? It's happened to me too. But, for me, by moving too quickly to trying to find the gold, I then had to deal with the grief and the ramifications of that internal struggle that I did not honor 4 or 5 years later. And it had such a bigger impact and it did so much more damage because it was this festering ickiness inside of me that I just didn't let happen naturally, because I was like, okay, well, if we're not, right, like, let's look for the good. If we focus on the good, then everything will be fine. Yes, but also no.
100%. Yeah. It's a both and.
Yeah. I think one of the most interesting things I've learned as in my later adulthood that's influenced the way I talk to entrepreneurs and also about my own journey is the yes and factor. The yes, you can, and there's still other things that happen in life and in our journey. So,
well, this is the difference between, you may not have the theory, but you've hit on something really important, an important point. The difference between toxic positivity and realistic optimism. Toxic positivity shuts people down. It's the Pollyanna thing, right? Of good vibes only. And the research on resilience actually talks about the term realistic optimism, which is the exactly yes and that you're talking about. Yes, you have what it takes to do this, and it will be hard.
Yeah.
It's both.
Yeah. Well, and that, I mean, life. Yes, and life is that. So very much so. Yeah. Wow. I had not heard that research.
Realistic option. Yeah.
Yeah. I like that so much more, because one of the things that I really leaned into in my journey of leaving Texas was, I get to choose my reality, right? Like I get to create my path forward and build on the foundation I want. And I really leaned into looking for the potential and the opportunities, as opposed to I did, without realizing it, I was not leaning into like the toxic positivity. I was looking for realistic optimism because I was focused on being resilient, not being strong, not being a survivor, but like focused on I am resilient and I can overcome any obstacle given that I know my core values and what I want out of life, and like enough time I can I can get out of this whatever situation.
Mhm.
But I okay, now I got to go do some research. Making a mental note to go
Well, and
dive into that.
I wrote a blog post about toxic positivity and realistic optimism. So I'll send you the link. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah, that would be amazing. How does
Yeah.
that toxic positivity, where do you see that showing up and doing damage to entrepreneurs?
Well, to come back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, it has to do with stigma, right? Anytime anybody there are communities, and there is kind of in the dominant culture of the spiritual type folks, or the aspirational folks, it's positive vibes only.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no room, no capacity for any acknowledgement of difficulty. And the problem with that is that it's stuck in the binary where negative cancels the positive and positive cancels the negative. And just in terms of the both and, like the way the mind works, it has a bias in favor of negative data. It has a bias in favor of where the bear poop is, because if that's where the poop is, that's where the bear is, and you're going to get at.
Right.
So you remember the poop, you don't remember the flowers, which are right there, but you don't remember them because it's about survival.
Yeah.
So as modern human beings, we aren't afraid of the bear or the saber-toothed tiger, but that's all what our mind retains. And so our job is to open the mind, to train the mind to see the whole picture and to hold both the negative and the positive in the same container.
Yeah.
And so I'm just going to pause for a second because I just lost my train of thought and I want to let it get back on the... So the positive, when the negative comes, the positive move is not to squash the negative. The positive move is actually to turn toward the negative and say, oh, I see that this pain is here. I see that this difficulty is here. I see that this distress is here. I see that this struggle is here. And just the acknowledgement, right, of like, oh yeah, I see the struggle. And then the next thing is, of course, I'm feeling distress. Look how hard things are. And when it's hard, you feel the difficulty. It's okay to have hard times. It's okay to have difficult emotions. It's actually, as entrepreneurs, because mental health challenges are inherent in entrepreneurship, they're a part of our work. They're the result of the high demand, high stress leadership role that we play in our business, high stakes, high demand, that we are going to struggle.
Yeah.
So of course, you see, and the positivity in that is the kindness that we show to the distress that we're feeling. So that in this way, the negativity, we don't drown in it, because the folks who are concerned about or who use the approach of toxic positivity really do have a good heart. They really want for us to be well. They don't want for us to suffer. That's what we want. We don't want suffering for ourselves, but we try to help ourselves feel better by trying to eliminate the suffering, when really the positive, when the negative comes, is the kindness towards the distress that's the result of the negative thing.
Mm-hmm. It's in
That's
how
the training.
It's in how you respond to yourself.
Yes, 100%.
In those moments.
You got it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is work that doesn't ever end, but can also be helped and supported by someone who has the skill set that you do. Where do you point someone to begin in that journey?
Well, I really think our self-talk, the way we talk to ourselves inside is really an important place to start, because we have a tendency to say to ourselves, just like we say to others, we reassure and cheer ourselves on in such a way that it shuts down the things that are coming for care. And to be able to speak to ourselves differently, like to just what I said, acknowledge, validate, reassure, it's okay, it's normal, of course, right? That's really the way to start. the self-compassion, that is a move of self-kindness. Another thing that you can do is to think about these thoughts or ways of thinking or points of view or thoughts as parts of you. So you can rephrase it. Like, we'll often talk to ourselves. Another way we try to encourage ourselves is by shit talking ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
What's the matter with you? Get up off the couch, you lump of whatever, right? You're never going to amount to anything. Recognizing, oh, wait a minute, this is the voice of the inner critic.
Mm-hmm.
And the inner critic doesn't have good communication skills.
I call mine Nellie,
Yes.
after Nellie Olson from the
Yes.
Little House on the Prairie.
I remember Nellie Olson. Oh my goodness.
Yep.
And she's really here for a good reason. She has my well-being at heart. She's just not really good at communicating with me.
Yeah.
And so I can say hello to the critic and recognize the critic. My sense of me recognizes that there's a criticizing process, a criticizing voice or point of view that's talking to me. And when there's a me who can see what's happening in here and who can relate to what's happening on my insides, changes your perspective and changes your experience. So those are the two things. The first is the kindness, the self-kindness when you're in distress. And the second one is this kind of noticing capacity that there's a me who notices, oh, that's like really the itty bitty shitty committees here. That's really self-critical. Ouch.
Yeah. Well, and that is about seeing that natural behavior, right? From a bigger perspective, as opposed to being in that shitty behavior.
Yes.
We're taking a step back and we're looking at the forest for the trees versus the tree trunk in front of our face.
One of my teachers talks about it like having your head in a bowl of soup.
Okay.
When your head's in the soup, if your head's like in the soup, you're drowning. You don't know it's soup. You don't know it's a bowl. You don't know there's anything outside of it. All you know is you're drowning. When you have the bowl in your hands and you're looking down at the bowl, you know it's a bowl. You know there's soup. You have a sense of yourself and what else is here.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. When you have this observing capacity, this warm, compassionate, kind observing capacity, then there's more to life than just fighting not to drown.
Right. Yeah. Which honestly took me a good 6 years to figure out when I was in the middle of it, right? Like the drowning.
It's a skill.
Yeah.
It's a skill.
But the beautiful thing is once you've done it once, it starts to speed up in the different situations, right? Like once you've identified that process for yourself, with unfortunate repetition, but life, so repetition, I have found that I have moved through it faster, because there's been unhealthy, work situations that I've been in with like different contractors and stuff like that. There's been unhealthy, like me working for people and yada yada. And I've learned, and I'm super proud of the fact that I can say, I have moved through this so much faster. What took me 7 years took me a year. The next time it took me 6 months. The next time it took me 3, right? And yada, yada.
This applies really in the everyday for business owners. When you find, like, for example, the email can come. This is what happened just before I got on the call with you. An email came that just like really sent me through the roof. But when you have the capacity to notice, oh, something's happening. Like these things happen all the time. Somebody says something stupid, something goes wrong, and you're activated, right?
Yeah.
That capacity to have a you who notices, oh, I'm activated. What am I going to do now? Oh, let me just reassure myself. Of course you're activated. This is super frustrating. You've been going around and around and around in circles with these people. It's making you want to grit your teeth. I can feel all the emotion in me now about this thing, right? And you spend that time with yourself, and then, okay. What's my next right action? My next right action right now, in my case, was to just shut everything down and prepare for the call with you.
Yeah.
And my next right action after this will be probably to have lunch. And then my next right action after that will be to come back and consider it with my head not in the soup.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
It's just a moment by moment tactic. I wanted to bring this home for the folks who are listening, because it's not only about recovery that takes years and years. It's something applicable to our day-to-day life.
Yeah. One of the most impactful pieces of advice I ever heard, and I was young, like I was like maybe 19, 20, was the difference between a reaction and a response is time, right? You react in the moment, you respond from a place of observation and choosing and intentionality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're doing for yourself with this, situation today is you're not reacting to the email in the moment. You are taking the time to be considerate to yourself and give yourself the space to get your head out of the soup.
Yeah, 100%. Yes, it is space, time. And this is one of the things where, were you talking, you were talking about rest before we got on the call, weren't you?
Yeah.
This is where rest in the form of just simple space is so important. Most people think about rest as sleep, but there's so much more to rest. I'm sure you've read Tricia Hersey's book, Rest is Resistance.
And I haven't, but it's going on my list. I haven't even heard of it.
You absolutely must. She runs an Instagram account called The Nap Ministry, and her book is called Rest as Resistance.
I love it.
We'll put the link in the show notes. She talks about the forms of rest. And we tend to think of rest as sleep or vacation.
Yep.
But simple space between calls, space between breaths, space between action, right? This is such a mental health strategy and also a resilience strategy and also a leadership strategy. Because when we think about, like, for example, responding versus reacting to stuff that happens in our business, when we react and burn bridges, right? But with space, we can reconnect with our values, like you talked about earlier. We can choose a response that comes from our values. We can come from a place that, in terms of our nervous system, is actually supportive for us and resourced instead of depleting. Space is a form of rest that is so, so important.
It's so true, because there's been days where I've been like, oh my God, I need a nap. And I go and I lay down and I'm not physically tired. I just literally needed a mental break. I just needed to not be obsessing about whatever project or thing or thought. And I just, I read a book, or I just stare out the window and watch the birds and enjoy the sunshine, or I just sit peacefully I have this senior chihuahua who loves to just be with me in the heated blanket that we got for Christmas. And it's like his favorite thing in the whole world. And I just exist and I pet him and I absorb, that moment. Yeah. And that has been more nourishing and restful and like impactful. And then it's like, oh, well, that was 15 minutes and I'm not tired anymore. Go figure.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you just took the space. You just gave yourself space.
Yeah. Space can be one of the best gifts we can give ourselves, whether it's a moment of joy or a moment of tension and stress, right? If it's a moment of joy, you have the space to absorb it, to memorize it, to really lock it in. If it's a moment of chaos or insanity or reaction, right? We get to have this space to choose our path forward.
Yes. And I think pausing in joy, I'm so glad you brought that up, because part of this training the mind to see both the bear poop and the flowers, we don't retain the flowers. We don't retain the good data because our minds are trained not to. Yeah. But this process of taking in the joy, taking in the good, pausing, there's data. I think it maybe is 3 minutes. Rick Hansen has a process called taking in the good, and he has the data I'll send you the link. We can put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Giving the space to really absorb the experience of joy is what trains us to know, to trust, and have like the embodied knowledge that there is joy in the world and there's joy for us. Yeah. And if we don't pay attention, it's going to pass us by, and all we're going to remember is the bear poop.
Yeah. It's so funny you say that, because I literally had this thought like yesterday or the day before. You know how Facebook gives us like Facebook memories, like from stories or things that pop up? I'm better about sharing like happy, but milestone happy, not necessarily like nuanced happy, everyday happy, in my Instagram or Facebook feed. But like I have stories from 2 and 3 years ago where it was like, oh, that was a chaotic morning, on to like the next thing, or like here's my to-do list. I don't remember what the chaos was, but obviously it was absorbing a bigger piece of my head. But I also don't, I've noticed that there's been like references to something good that happened. I don't remember the good either, right? Like 3 years later, I don't remember that that must have been a stressful day. But so I've made a mental observation of my own habits that I need to start locking in the good, like on a deeper level, and really like taking those moments. Do you have like a joy jar?
Yes.
I love it. I literally was just thinking, like, I had an intention at the beginning of the year. I wanted to start a joy jar and start putting like little notes and things in there for myself. And I need to do it because I feel like just the act of writing that down helps lock it in, right?
Yes.
Because we're
Yes,
observing it
100%.
in different capacity.
Well,
I am pretty good about my
you don't
gratitude journal.
you don't feel like that. It's actually neuroscientifically true that writing
Hmm.
stuff down helps you remember better.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, I know there's like ways we learn, right? Like we learn through hearing, we learn through writing, we learn through reading. I know that sciencey stuff, but like it is a neuroscience lock-in. That makes 100% sense. But I've been okay with like maintaining my gratitude journal, writing down something. But like some days it's like, I'm grateful for my dogs, right? Like, and it's not really
Yes.
intentional and specific. It's just more
Yes.
like generalized gratitude.
So I have a bone to pick with gratitude practice.
Let's do it. Let's pick a bone.
I think people do it backwards, and the way you're writing it might be beneficial to you, but I think you could get more out of it. The way we've been taught to do it is to write a list of things we're grateful for.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually takes the forms of things we should be grateful for.
Yeah.
Like the roof over my head, the dog that I have. But except if you're feeling shitty,
right,
and you're writing a list and you feel shitty because you don't feel grateful, which makes you feel shittier, right? That's just not helpful. Or sometimes it's just empty words. You're not actually feeling the embodied experience of gratitude. And that's actually what makes the difference, is feeling the feels.
Mm-hmm.
So I would invite you to do it backwards.
Okay.
By looking back at the day and noticing if there's anything in the day that was like pleasant or made you smile or felt good. So like the baby in the cart in front of you at the checkout line at the grocery store. Like Monday, they often in the grocery store will have flowers right in front of the checkouts. Maybe just the flowers, the beauty of the flowers. You observed a nice interaction between two people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just something very like low key, not even necessarily related to you, but just something that you go, oh, that was nice.
Yeah.
And you take a moment to be, like we talked about, savoring the good. You take a moment to really relive that moment, the smells, the sight, the sounds, 30 seconds, just sort of like really taking it in. Oh, I'm just so appreciative. I appreciate that. I appreciate that showed up for me today. And once you're in that space of appreciation, then you might like to say, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the sense of appreciation. And I'm grateful that showed up in my world today, that I could have this experience now.
Yeah.
So the door is open now, and you can pause in the space of gratitude, because then what can happen is that bubbles will come up from underneath, and you'll notice, oh, and it was sunny today, and I'm grateful for that. Oh, and lunch was yummy. Oh, and the dog was funny today. Oh, yeah. And right. And so then you end up with a list of things that come from the gratitude space for which you are actually experiencing gratitude. And the other things may show up, like the house and the dog and all that kind of stuff, but they come from inside up instead of from your head down.
Well, and that's where gratitude should be coming from.
But we just don't know how to do it. If we don't know how to do it from the inside, we don't feel it. And it's the feeling that matters.
Yeah. One of my favorite gratitude practices for when I'm feeling really shitty and I need to just like snap out of it is a practice called the gratitude bomb, where you start as micro, like literally on your physical form, and you just start listing off all of the things you're grateful for. And it's very much from like a in your head space.
Yes.
But the goal being that you're spending it's like 60 seconds and you're just trying to list as many things to be grateful for as possible. And it starts like on you, and then immediately around you, and then in the room, and then in your home, and you just go bigger, right? Until like you're looking at like the world or the people in it or whatever. The goal being to rapid fire so that you're like rapid fire shifting your thought pattern. And while it's not necessarily from like, oh, I'm actually grateful for this sweater, it's like, I am grateful to have cozy clothes, right? Like it's a little bit chilly. I'm very grateful to be warm and snuggly. But we rapid fire shift the thought, like it's a pattern interrupt.
Yes. I can see the power of that.
Yeah.
Yep. I 100% see the power of that.
But it may not necessarily take you to a place of true gratitude, but it is a powerful tool for that interrupt.
Well, it does, because the mind will get in a track. right? And that's part of, you see, the real moral of the story is that we need many tools.
It's true.
Because I can see, just as you describe it to me, the power of the rapid fire to shift gears, right? But also, coming back to like the refinement, the nuance around gratitude, these are also small things, not things you should be grateful for. Like we think, count your blessings. Those are like big things. But actually, your blessings are also itty bitty little things. The gratitude, like you say, you start at the micro level with something small, like my pretty earrings.
They are so pretty. I've been watching them throughout the call, and I'm like, oh my God, those are so pretty.
Well, let me take a little side note and make an acknowledgement, because we're in Canada, that I'm on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and that land acknowledgements are a call to action. And as entrepreneurs, for reconciliation, right? And as entrepreneurs, one of the actions we can take for reconciliation is supporting Aboriginal, Indigenous businesses.
100%.
And these earrings are made by Angel Obashon, and her business is Indie City, INDI City, CITY. And she's a Canadian Indigenous woman who creates the most magnificent adornments.
Wow. I'll have to look her up. I have a couple of Indigenous artists that are local to me in Kitchener that I'm obsessed with. I made these earrings, so these ones are mine, but I have many pieces of jewelry and earrings and adornments myself from local Indigenous artists that I am obsessed with.
And so the everyday little things, gratitude is often more effective when you start with the minutia, the things that are right here, instead of thinking, if I'm talking gratitude, it has to be something big. No, it can be the teeny tiny little things like you do in the gratitude bomb.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, Shula, it has been such a joy and privilege to have you on. I feel like we could probably do 4 or 5 of these episodes.
No kidding.
I actually do want to have you back, because I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact of leadership and looking at our entrepreneur journeys as leaders, not just entrepreneurs. I think that'd be a really good conversation to have with you, because you touched on a few things I'm a little bit passionate about, and I could go on a soapbox. We're not going to do it today, but I think we could soapbox moment the hell out of a conversation around entrepreneur leadership, and the lack of recognition that entrepreneurship is leadership, in kind of our general entrepreneur society. So I can see your wheels spinning. So we will schedule another episode, because I think it would be a really powerful one. But any final thoughts on today's topic?
I think if there's one thing, like if there's one thing that the listener takes from this episode, it would be that there's nothing wrong with you. That as entrepreneurs, parenthesis, entrepreneurs who are leaders, you're doing hard work, and the natural, as in expected, consequences of hard work is that you can experience struggle. The struggle is inevitable. It's not a personal failure.
Yeah.
Mental health challenges are inherent in entrepreneurship. So if you're having a hard time, there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah. In fact, I would say you're probably doing some things right. Talk about a shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Shula, how can our listeners connect with you and reach out to explore more of your work and what you do? Sure.
Shula.ca for Canada is my website. What you might like to do is sign up for my newsletter, shula.ca/newsletter, because this is the kind of in-depth conversations that I write long-form blog posts, like between 1,500 and 3,000 words. So I really go in depth about things. And this is what you'll get in the newsletter, really juicy conversations about entrepreneurship, trauma, mental health, and money psychology. So I invite folks to connect with me that way.
Amazing. Well, you definitely need to, because just our conversation has sparked some fireworks in my own brain. I'm excited to go back and listen to this episode as I edit it, because I'm going to be taking notes and integrating things a little bit deeper. And I think this is going to be a popular one. If I'm just going to predict it. I think this is going to be one that people really enjoy, because I have really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm so grateful that you joined me. Thank you so much, Shula.
Thanks, Jennifer.